Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for attending this leadership session sponsored by Staff Senate. Today, Frank White will be visiting with us about the art of teaching and his education journey. Frank White has spent the last 34 years as a sociology professor at the University of North Dakota. His teaching assignments included classes like Introduction to Sociology, Social Problems, Sociology of Sport, and Drugs and Society. Over the last 40 years, Frank has also taught at Lake Region State College, Grand Forks Air Force Base, East Grand Forks Technical School, the University of Minnesota Crookston, and American College of Norway in Moss, Norway. Frank has been named the University of North Dakota Professor of the Year in 1997 and again in 2019. He earned numerous teaching service awards, including the Academic Advisor of the Year, Faculty Service Learning Award, and was named a Bush Teaching Scholar for his innovative work on classroom assessment. The UND Foundation established the Professor Frank White Endowment Scholarship, and his philanthropic and community efforts have helped establish endowed academic scholarships at Mayville State University, Lake Region State College, and the University of North Dakota. Frank continues to share his critical insights at numerous high schools, colleges, and community organizations. His research deals with the stigma, stereotypes, and misuse associated with current drugs of concern. His work has been recognized in recent interviews by the USA Today, the Minneapolis Star and Tribune, the Los Angeles Times, and CBS News. Please welcome Frank White.
Thank you.
Yep.
Can you hear me out there? Is the microphone working? Good. And I could just sit back and let her talk for another hour. That's a very nice introduction. I appreciate that as well. I got a call a couple of weeks ago by the Faculty Senate. They asked if I would like to talk about ed leadership, about my teaching career and journey over the last 40 years. And you know, I don't always get asked to share my leadership acumen. It reminds me of a time when I was visiting with President Kelly at the time and his wife Marcia. We were visiting, and then the next time she introduced me, she was talking about Frank White and his wisdom and stuff like that too. For those who knew me and grew up with me, those aren't always adjectives that are associated with Mr. White. So I jumped at the chance that I could speak on this particular topic. The second thing too is that it happened so quickly. I remember the first couple of days teaching and all the trials and tribulations starting this 40-year journey. I never thought for a moment it would last this long. As a matter of fact, there are plenty of people that didn't think it would even start that long ago too. So I'm kind of glad to share that idea, and I think the title is well worded, An Odyssey and a Journey. When I think back to the high school days, being a college professor was not in the cards for me. I was a jock, and some people might even say a dumb jock. I was a class clown, and pretty happy with that particular title. You know, being the witty, to cut up, and not having to take anything seriously. Finished in about bottom half of my class, which isn't a good format or precursor for going on to higher education. I went to college. I went to the wrong college, chose the wrong major, wrong teaching mission. And it wasn't very long after I got into that first year of my freshman year of college that I go, I'm at the wrong school, I got the wrong major, and I didn't know what else to do. So I started doing some self-inventory, and I was thinking, what could I do? Do I have any skills in anything? And I was involved in sports in high school, and a lot of my friends were in sports. We all went to college together. The one thing we seemed to have some self-esteem was involved in sports, and we did everything, you know, football, track, baseball, wrestling, you name it, and we were doing that year-round. Fun time, and that's what we did, but there weren't any professional athletes that were going on in that group of kids. So after I thought about that first year, what could I do? I decided that I'd like to coach, and I thought I would make a good coach as my background. I had a passion for doing that, but the big hang-up, the big obstacle was that if you're going to coach, you have to get a teaching degree, and teaching I didn't think was going to be that much fun. You know, teaching's a tough deal. You know, first couple years I got into this field, it wasn't long before people reminded me of this, and I see it in the research all the time. The number one fear in America is public speaking. And to go out there and do that's not easy. It takes courage to teach. And I'm always amazed that the people are able to do this effectively and certainly for those who do it for a long period of time and make a career of that. I started that journey as not a very good student. I transferred to Mayville State University, which is known for its teaching education. I was, wouldn't use the word subjected, but I was introduced to a lot of good teachers, people that had made teaching their career and became my role models. And as I tried to catch up, because like I said, I wasn't a very good student, and I did things that a lot of students I think do. I kind of took the easy path. I took what I thought were the easier courses: sociology, psychology, political science. Took those classes, and by the instructor's reputation, they were the easier ones too. And I went through that 4 years. And then I ran into the first stone wall. I ran into probably the biggest obstacle ever if you're thinking about being a teacher at the professional level, and I had to do my student teaching. So I had partied and had a good time for 4 years. I had my major. I went into my student teaching practicum, and even today, now 40 years later, I get a chance to reflect now. And I think back to that student teaching. That was the hardest teaching assignment that I was ever given. And I've been quite a few places. I've been in some tough environments here too, not just at UND. But going into a student teaching perspective, you think back and you're young and you're inexperienced. And you don't have any confidence. And when I went to Hatton High School to do my student teaching, the people that they placed me with were all very good instructors who had taught for 40 years. They came out of schools like Concordia and Moorhead and Mayville State. And they took these raw people like myself and tried to mold us into something that, quite frankly, I wasn't sure I was able to do. And by doing that, too, it's kind of hard because your role models or people are very good. That's tough. And then they asked me to teach or student teach a couple of different courses. Man, I had a business minor. I did business law, psychology, sociology, American government. I taught 7th grade math. I taught 7th grade geography. It was just too much. I was just overloaded. And every night, you're trying to do that and try to do well. That's tough. Kind of beats you down. But by far, the toughest thing that I had to do in student teaching was the students. Those students at Hatton High School got student teachers every day, every week. They went through them, and I gave them a label. I said, those students experience what we call student teachers fatigue. They got tired of student teachers coming in. They had excellent teachers, and yet they get people like me every quarter, every month coming in there and trying to, and you could see it in their body language. You walk in there and they go, oh, God, look at this prize. Look at this new one they brought in this week too. And I felt exactly like that. I went there like a sacrificial lamb. And I walked in there the first day, and I made the mistake that I did many, many times before that, and a few times after that too. I thought, I'd get by on my charm and my wit, always funny, make a joke of myself. It doesn't work like that in teaching. It doesn't work like that when you become a public speaker. You're the only person, facing the wrong way. I used to joke and tell students it's the most stressful thing you can do with your clothes on. When I went in there, I remember, and I could see it in the body, and there's 2 comments I remember right off the bat. This is the first week of student teaching. I went up to a young lady, and I was trying to, be personal and get to know them in person. And I said to her, and I remember her very well. I still am friends with her today. This is 1970. This is 44 years ago. I went up to her and I said, how are you doing? Nothing. And I said, so when is Thanksgiving vacation? When does that come? And she said, when you leave. She said, that's our vacation. And we were on quarters back then too, and we student taught until Thanksgiving, and they were already looking forward to getting rid of us like that too. I had another student in that same class who later on, he worked with my sister at the hospital. And they were talking and doing that North Dakota thing where they connecting the dots. And they said, my sister said, yeah, my brother, he's from Hatton. My brother student taught there in 1978. And he said, what's his name? And she said, Frank White. And he goes, oh yeah, we remember Frank. He said, Frank was the only student teaching we never made cry. We broke everybody except him. And I took some pride from that too, but I'll tell you what, I might not have showed it, but boy, there were many times that I did not think I was going to make it. I went, and student teaching, first of all, you got to learn all that material. You got unrealistic role models. The pressure, I think, is intense, and the students, you really have to win their approval, which is the best way to do it anyway. I'm glad they didn't just give it to you. I'm glad you had to earn that too. And as that 12-week episode unloaded, as it went through, I started doing things that they were just intuitive. I didn't read on how to do this too, but I got involved with their lives. I went to all the sporting events. You know, on Tuesday night, women's basketball over in Northwood. On Friday nights, I went to the football games. You know, I was kind of one of those weird guys too. Like, I even went to the PTA meetings we weren't required to do. I remember in high school when my mother would go to the PTA meetings, and she'd come home and we'd say, what did the teacher say about us? And for the most part, they said nice things about that. And I like to listen to that too. I went to the PTA meetings. I did all the ACT testing, you know, prepping for them as whatever. I went to every sporting event I could possibly go to. I was involved with them. And then the day came late in that spring quarter, that fall semester, when we were doing this, and it's called Judgment Day. This is where that guy from Mayville State comes and he watches you teach for the day, and it's pass-fail. You either get a pass or a fail, and you go on to teaching, or you don't. And I, honest to God, I did not think I was good enough. I struggled in the classroom. I wasn't a very good speaker. You know, I came out of Walhalla, and they used to tease me about my dialect and my poor grammar. The guy I was student teaching under, one of them, he was an English teacher. He goes, Frank, you've got to work on your grammar. You've got to work on your elocution. In fact, go home and tape yourself and just listen to yourself. You got to get rid of all those dangling participles and those double negatives, Frank. You know, people are going to judge you right off the bat. That's how we spoke growing up, and I had to work on that. And I tried. It was just too much to overcome. I had too much work to do. But I tried. I worked hard, did the whole thing, you know, boom, boom, 12 weeks of that. And then the day came, and I remember him. He was a role model of mine. He's one of my favorite professors at Mayville State, Harvey McMullen. He came and he watched that, and I go, oh, man, I felt like dead man walking. I was walking that first classroom, was the intro to psychology class. I go, oh, those kids are going to eat me up here, and I'm going to be embarrassed, and I'm not going to be able to go on with this teaching career, which you could say goodbye to coaching as well. Walked in there, and he was in the back, bigger than life, you know. Kids were sitting there just ready to pounce, you know. And I remember asking the first question, and it was a psychology class. I don't know if it was classical conditioning or some Freudian truism, but I asked a question, not expecting an answer, not expecting a response. And if there was going to be a response, I didn't know what it might be, in front of this guy who's writing everything down. And to my surprise, the hands start popping up, and they start answering questions. And I was kind of surprised, and they had their books open too, and sometimes they were giving the right answer, sometimes they weren't, but they were trying their hardest. And I didn't understand it at the time, but as I kept going through that hour, and that guy in the back is writing all this stuff down, and they were popping up with their hands, I go, okay, Clark, you know, share some more too. Julie, tell me what you think there too. And they were doing that, and they did it for an hour straight. And the next class, they did it for an hour straight. When that guy left that day, he come up to me and goes, you know, Frank, you really made an impression on these kids. You could tell if they like you. I really like the way you knew them by their first names. You would develop a relationship with these people. That's very, very rare, he said, especially in this type of environment. He said, God, straight A plus, good luck. You're going to make a good teacher. I go, wow. I couldn't understand that. And what I learned later on is that these students had learned to appreciate me. I'd won them over, and I won them over because I went to their activities. I was involved in their life. I created a relationship. I created a connection that they appreciated, and they were trying to help me when they knew that I was nervous about that person. It was the first lesson in leadership I ever picked up, and I used many times later as I got into motivational leadership and motivational speaking. It's called the art of caring leadership. Students don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And once you do that, once you can establish that, they'll do anything for you, you know? And that's where that odyssey and that journey comes from. You know, leadership isn't always about getting someone to follow you. You know, I grew up with those teachers that were authoritarian, and they told you the way it was, and you didn't ever ask anything or debate or question nothing. You know, this is the new generation in the 1980s. You know, these were more rebellious. And I thought that was very, very important. Later on, I remember the Maya Angelou quotation. She said, you know, people will forget what you say. People will forget what you do, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And I made them feel good, and I'll tell you what, it came back tenfold. When I applied for my first job at Lake Region Community College, the guy who was hiring me called the superintendent at Haddon High School to get an idea, was this guy any good? Is Frank any good? And I remember the superintendent because he became a friend of mine, and in fact, I remember both these principals in that relationship. He said, yeah, Frank White was one of the best student teachers we ever had, and we've had hundreds, he said. And now I knew I wasn't one. There were better students. There were people who were much more committed to that, much better prepared. But it did make a difference. If I think about people like Einstein, and he said one time, he said, imagination is more important than knowledge, because knowledge is finite, information or imagination, he said, is infinite. As I got older, I go, you know what's, that should be changed a little bit. I should tweak that. Relationships are more important than knowledge, because those students don't remember what that lecture was about that day, classical, opera and conditioning, anything, but they remember Frank. And today, I still see many of those students at the football games and tailgate parties. They're grandparents now, and they come up and they say, Frank, my son's coming here, my grandson's gonna be in your class next fall. They haven't forgot that. Relationship building is a big part of teaching, and I've never forgot that in my first hurdle, my first obstacle when it came to teaching. Then I moved on to the second big obstacle when I got my first job at Lake Region Community College. This again back in the early to mid 1980s, and that was a different beast. Hired at Lake Region Community College, and it wasn't a sociology professor, it was a social science professor. So I was teaching 6 classes: political science, government, sociology, psychology, human relations, and more importantly, it was a community college, so it had a technical mission. I was teaching mechanics and plumbers, people going into electricians, going into electrical careers too. When you get into that different teaching mission, I was educated in grad school and as a bachelor's in academia with a teaching mission, or quote, a liberal arts mission. That's a whole different beast. And when I went in there too, we had students that would ask you, they were people going into mechanics, why do I gotta take sociology? What a garbage, that's useless. I'm gonna be a mechanic. And I used to get bothered by that too, but I started thinking about that and I go, they got a good point. Why should they have to take sociology? I used to say the same thing. Why do I get to take chemistry? I'm gonna be a laborer. I started thinking about that, and I learned real quickly that if you're gonna teach people, you gotta understand the audience. And it served me well at UND much later, because what I did is I started to integrate the classes. I used to teach sociology in the morning and then psychology, and they were separate. They were different pools of information, and they're like different silos. And then I go to the mechanics, that human relations class, and talk to them too. And there was no connection, there was no integration. When I taught at UND, I tell the people that they're going into med school, why do I take sociology? I go, sociology is probably more important in medicine than any other field. Diversity, multicultural education, bedside manner. Sociology is very important. You're not just gonna learn a skill or a technique. You're gonna learn a way of living, and if you're gonna be sensitive to people, you gotta know your audience, you gotta know your patients. It still works today. I got in there too, and I started talking about integration people, and I remember one of the things to do this, and again, it was intuitively, I kind of stumbled on it, trial and error too, is subtle use of humor. And it helped because I thought I was funny in high school, witty, class clown. And I remember trying to be inclusive with everybody, not just the students who were going on to UND or Mayville State to continue education, but also the people who were getting their hands-on technical education. And I shared one time with a mechanics student a story I'd read in Reader's Digest, and I'll share it with you real quickly here. It's a story of an auto mechanic who's in his shop, and he's taken apart a Harley engine. And he pulls the cylinder head off, and as he's doing that, he notices there's a heart surgeon from the local hospital over there, and he pulls the head off and he goes to the heart surgeon, he goes, hey, sir. And the heart surgeon looks over, he goes, how you doing? He says, good. He goes, hey, let me ask you a question. He said, look what I do here too. I took the engine apart, I took out the valves, I fixed them, I put it back together, and it runs smoothly. He said, you and I do the same thing, surgeon and mechanic, yet I only get paid a pittance of what you get paid. And the surgeon kind of looked at him, and he leaned over and he whispered to that mechanic, he said, yeah, try doing that, he said, with the engine running, he said. And when I shared that story, it was inclusive. It was not like telling a joke. It was the psychology of humor, to be inclusive. I learned later on that if you're going to talk about very, very sensitive topics like LBGT, if you're going to talk about racism and sexism, talk about social class and social class bias and topics like that, it helps if you can slide in a little self-effacing humor, and to be more inclusive. And the last thing I'll mention about that Lake Region Community College, which was the greatest foundation for my education that I could ever hope for at the time, was with Lake Region Community College. Now it's known as Lake Region State College. Lake Region Community College, and let me tell you, that was a community. We kicked in. It was like a family. We not only taught unbelievably heavy teaching loads. I had a couple of people from UND come to visit that they were speaking at the college. Alice Hoffert, one of the things, George Schubert, you might remember those names from back then, Tom Clifford. They came to the college there and they were looking at this, and I remember them because I worked with them in Twomley when I was a student. And they were looking at my teachers going, oh my God, Frank, how do you find time to do anything? I go, I don't. I said, the teaching load is very heavy, but we did community stuff too. I took tickets at basketball games. I drove the basketball coach sometimes, to not in a bus, but in a car, to games we played out in Bottineau and Miles City, Montana. And I was glad to do that because it was sports. But you get home at 3 o'clock in the morning, back into the classroom. I chaperoned dances that we never got out of there till 2 o'clock in the morning, refereeing fights and everything else that goes on at these college dances. We on Saturdays, we did ACT testing. I was working 7 days a week. I'm not lying. I never believed in burnout. I never believed in exhaustion, but I was suffering. I can't do this. We were paid so poorly back then. The school almost went broke. It almost terminated its mission. We were paid so, I hate to even say what I was paid back then, but I know I taught for 5 years, and I was more in a hole when I left there after 5 years. I could not pay for my school loans, car payment, rent. It just wasn't enough. So I'm sitting there, and I'm getting worked to death. I'm feeling like, I don't know what I'm doing. Psych, social, I'm not an expert in anything, I'm trying to keep one day ahead. I'm completely played out. And then I had what we here in psychology call a defining moment. I had a defining moment in my life, and every one of you have had one or two of those. You don't know when they're coming, but a defining moment is basically, it's a moment or an event that forces you to make a decision, okay? My defining moment happened when they brought in a motivational speaker to talk to the faculty at Lake Region. And I thought, oh, motivational speaker, and I didn't believe in that stuff either, And I go, I wouldn't even have went, but it was required, and they canceled classes. So I went to auditorium and I listened to this guy, and he started in on, how this opens up. And I was sitting there, and it's almost like a religious epiphany. He started to talk, and I kind of come to a little bit, and I thought he was talking right to me. He started saying things like this, if you're in a rut, he said, the only difference between a rut and a grave, he said, is that a rut's got both ends kicked out of, he said. Well, that's pretty good. I might be able to use that in class. He went on to say things like this. He said, if you're struggling and you feel exhausted, ask yourself this question. What's your purpose? What's your purpose here? What's your purpose, Frank, at UND? What's the purpose of you working 7 days a week? What's the purpose of all this? And I thought, that's a pretty good question. I thought, but I go, what is my, and I didn't have a purpose. I didn't have a goal, didn't have any destination. I was just going through the motions. And then he went on to talk about this too. He said, if you're a teacher, that should be a demonstration of what you love. You've committed in your entire life. I thought of myself, did a self-review. I go, God, 7.5 years of college I went to. I've taught for a year. That's 8.5 years I've committed to my profession, and I didn't feel connected to it. In fact, it made me tired. I was so exhausted and burnt out at the end, I was going to quit teaching that very first year. And I had other options too. I had just been offered a job to sell insurance with a bank back in Grand Forks, American Family. And my friends were selling insurance, seemed to be doing very well. I was going to do that at the end. I had just been offered a position at another bank in Grand Forks. It's called a diversity specialist. They were hiring teachers back then to academically advise their employees to go back to college and get their degree. And also if you could speak about sociology, if you could speak about harassment, harassment in the workplace. I thought, this is perfect for me. I'm going to do that. And also in the back of my mind, I thought, I'm going to leave here. This is not working for me. And I'm going to go into high school. I had my high school degree, teaching degree yet, and I wanted to coach. I got into teaching because I wanted to coach. That was my purpose, I thought. And the school didn't have wrestling. It didn't have football. There was no future for me there at all. And I thought about that and what he had to say. And he started talking about words like love. It should be a demonstration of what you love. And it sounded to me a lot like I was teaching psychology. It sounded a lot like rational emotive therapy. And what that basically means real quickly is that it means that it isn't the events that depress us. It's how we interpret the events. So you think you're having a bad day, well, do an inventory. You had a bad day because someone made a comment or a bad situation with a student, but you probably had 10 other good ones in a day. Probably had lunch with a friend, sunshiny day, it's the weekend. And I started doing inventory, I go, God, that does make a big difference. And it changed my whole perspective. It was a defining moment, and they say about defining moments too, because I learned to speak on this to a lot of high school and middle school students too. When you talk about defining moment, these moments force you to make a decision, Either move on or keep doing what you're doing. They can be transformative. They can be change you fundamentally. And I don't want to over-exaggerate here too, but it did that for me. And I thought, you know what? I went into sociology, but sociology wasn't my first love, Sociology is about institutions, Sociology is about social forces, political, economic, cultural, I was a psychologist. I told her, I was a closet psychologist all those years, I'm into motivation and emotion and personality, how you can change yourself. I listened to all these other motivational speakers, Stephen Covey, Tony Robbins, Awaken the Giant Within. That guy awakened the giant within that. I couldn't wait to get to that meeting. When I left that meeting, I was going to change everything too, and I did too. Here's a couple of quick changes I gave. Right off the bat, my given name is Francis, which I never felt fit me. I never enjoyed that. I got teased a lot by being called Francis growing up. In high school, I had a nickname called Coco, which was good for sports and jocks. When I went to interview at Lake Region, they interviewed me, and the president of the college said, Francis, can we call you Frank? And I said, yeah, call me Frank. I didn't think I was going to get the job, but I didn't think I was going to say no. And he called me Frank, and I never liked Frank. I didn't think fit me either. I thought it was gangster, Frank Stallone, Frank Sinatra, Frank James. I didn't think that too short, I didn't think that fit me either. When I left that meeting in that defining moment, it changed my whole persona. I embraced sociology, and it wasn't just, I embraced psychology. It wasn't just embracing psychology, is that I'd integrated it too. I'd put psychology and sociology together. I became a social psychologist, and that made all the sense in the world to me. My culture, my background, my growing up, that shaped who I was, but it didn't make it a prison. You can change your way of thinking. You've been dealt a hand of cards, and you can play those cards a lot of different ways, and I did that. And I not invented, but I incorporated that emotional element, that passion. And from that day on, I was a different person in that classroom. The next day, I changed all my syllabi from Francis to Frank. And what funny thing happened? I started to become this Frank White persona. And students responded to that Frank White persona. And another thing the guy said that day, that defining moment, he said, if you can reinvent yourself, why would you reinvent yourself, be a cheap imitation of somebody else? You're an original. Why wouldn't you just take all of your gifts and all of your skills and all your interests and do that? And I thought that made a lot of sense. Most teachers, and I see this in the literature too, most teachers, professors, or instructors, they'll teach the way that they were taught. So when I was in that classroom, I was doing the tired, lecture, term, definition, example, term. It was ritualistic. It was passive. It was boring. And the students picked up on that too. When you got into that ritual, I go, this is not going to work. I'm going to come alive here too and change my name to Frank White, not legally, but professionally. and became my alter ego too. I thought what that guy said, if you can be anything you want, because I was reinventing myself. I was going to come back somebody different. I took the biggest gamble of my life when I went to class the next day, and I threw all my notes away. I said, I'm done with that situation. I'm going to teach with the emotion. I'm going to teach using first-person stories. I've got a near photographic memory. Anybody, a student of mine, has never seen me with notes ever. I share narratives. I do mental mapping by connecting different thoughts in either a chronological or historical way. Region students used to say, God, Frank, he's looking up there. He looks like he's reading something right off the wall. Looks like he's talking to his hand. I wonder if he got something written on his hand, stuff like that too. It was so convincing, and it made a big difference. And I added the emotional perspective. I added that passion idea, and that made all the difference in the world. And I never looked back, never used notes. Keep in mind, when I started teaching, no PowerPoints. We didn't have personal computers when I started that college. There were no Zoom. There was no technology, no laptops. There was nothing. You were the audiovisual aid. And if you taught the way you were taught from the 1950s, it wasn't going to work, and it wasn't working for me. But this Frank White, engaging, spontaneous, hyper, passionate. You know, the number one quality students have in their teachers, this is way back then, and it's still a case today, the number one trait they like in their instructors is enthusiasm. And the guy said that, he goes, why do you expect students to get excited when you're not even excited? My next leap after that, Frank White came to UND. I wasn't even going to come here, but my boss, who was the chair of the sociology department, had just gotten an ACE fellowship, and they had an opening. And I still had some work to do on my master's thesis. And so I came back, and I didn't think I was ready for it, but he said, you know, Frank, if you want to go into a community college, which I did, I wanted to get to Minneapolis. I wanted to get to a community college which was better pay. Minnesota had collective bargaining, so they paid the instructors at the community college, same thing they paid them at the University of Minnesota. That was good. Got me into the cities, a lot of cultural and ethnic and professional sports. And also, if I got to a community college, they had football and they had wrestling in those schools. So I was applying constantly there too. My boss at the time said, Frank, come here. Even if you're going to go do that, if you have 1 year at the university, that'll make a big difference on your resume. And it made sense. I go, yeah, well, let's just give these positions out. I think I'm going to try that. Came to UND here too, and here's the third obstacle that I ran into at here. And you probably know what this is, and Gabe and you and I talk about this a lot too. I came here, and I was confronted with the math lecture. 240 kids, 240 plus kids. I had many times over 300 in there too. The dean, Dean O'Kelly, you know, I've been here, I'm so old that they got buildings named after people. I worked with O'Kelly, Clifford, Strinden, you know. I'm waiting for a White Hall or the White House. I thought that had a nice ring to it. Dean O'Kelly said, Frank, you know, it's just a number. Why don't you do a class over at Burton's, you know, 500 people. The provost, not that long ago, Deb Stores, she said, Frank, it's just a number. Come over to Columbia Hall and we'll fill those classrooms up, but there's over 300 over there too. You know, there's a point of diminishing returns. That's too big. Now, let me just add one caveat to this story. I was young in my career when I came here, still in my mid-20s. I got thrown into that mass lecture, and I got 6 of them. Intro to social problems, juvenile delinquency, sociology of sport, and I got a double whammy with the social problems. I got a second class, all over 240 people. And I walked in there, and here's what they do, or here's what they did. I think they still do. But those intro classes are often given to the least experienced teachers. They're given to the people who are adjunct, part-time. They're given to graduate students. As people go up in their tenure, they don't want to do this class anymore. They're tough. They're a logistical nightmare. And you got out there to get this class, and there's 250, we'll say, being generous here, there's 250 people that have a 12-second attention span. Try to keep that group on task with no Zoom, no PowerPoint, nothing when we started. And even when I was there for a while, and I'll share the story in one of my defining moments here real quickly, is that I never liked the technology. I thought that was kind of a crux. You know, it's good to have technology, but that's not the teacher. And again, I went into those classes and I was hit the first day of class. I walked down mass lecture, full, 2 young ladies sitting in the front, giggling and laughing, and of course I tried to make talk, and they go, how's it going? They said, good, good, good. I said, I'm Frank White. They go, Frank White? You're not Brad Stewart? I go, no, I'm not Brad Stewart. I'm Frank White. They go, oh, we did not sign up for a class of Frank White. We wanted Brad Stewart. And you know, Brad Stewart is a friend of mine. Brad Stewart was a very, very popular instructor at UND. I know he was a professor of the year, and he might, Bonnie, did he win 2 in a row? Professor of the year, Brad Stewart? Do you remember that? He won 2 in a row, that popular, and he was a perfect guy for that era too. He's very anti-authoritarian. Students love that. Wasn't afraid to throw the F word around. He had that academic freedom back then. I don't know if you get away with that now. It was never my style, and I never wanted to imitate anybody else too, but those 2 young ladies, when they said that you're not Brad Stewart, I go, no, I'm Frank White. You know, this is going to be all together different around here. and they looked at it, and they both got up and they walked out. And to make matters worse, as the class, we didn't get going here too, but they started to murmur. You could see it. They were visiting and they were saying, "That's not Brad Stewart. That's not that. I don't know who he is. That's not." And about, I suppose, 240 kids, about 25 to 30 got up and walked out. That was my first day. That was my christening with the mass lecture. And I remember thinking, boy, words that start with the word mass. Massacre. mass hysteria, masochistic, critical mass. Just try to control something like that too. And you can't control it. You can manage it. But I did something, and I think it made all the difference in my world again too, because I had another defining moment. I leaned back on my educational psychology background. I was lucky enough to do student teaching and take educational psychology classes. And in my educational psychology class, on the reading list, which I had kept, was an author, and his name was Parker Palmer. Parker Palmer was, again, another motivational speaker. Parker Palmer was a former sociology professor. He was an activist. He was a minister, and he had great ideas, and he introduced me, after reading that book from cover to cover, he introduced me to the science, or what we call pedagogy today. Pedagogy is the art and the science of teaching. And again, a lot of people, they go about teaching as a science, the technology, the science in the background, the stimulus response, and that never really appealed to me. But when I read that book, and his book was titled this, it was called The Courage to Teach. I give every one of my graduate students a copy of Courage to Teach, because it takes courage to teach. And he had a lot of great lessons. One of his lessons I picked up right away from that book, he said, learning is a series of connections, and when the connections stop, so does the learning. And I thought that makes a lot of sense too, because sometimes when you tell a story that's too long, you lose the students. Sometimes when you say a point and definition, then they stop writing. But if you connect these thoughts, if you connect this, and it's called narrative lecturing, sharing narratives. And I thought that made a lot of sense. And he also said something else in his book. He said, technology is what people use until the teacher arrives. Technology is important. Have that in your toolbox, but you are the one that's the most important. You're the focal point, and you got to do that right. And I took that idea there, and what I noticed, and what I thought of real quickly, because of my psych background and my personality, is I looked at the art of teaching. Not the science, the art of teaching. And the art of teaching, I looked at teaching like a performance art. I used to think about people like, if you look at the biblical stories, even today with students, if you look at History's Mysteries, the History Channel, the story of the Bible, that's more interesting when you talk about people and obstacles and journeys and odysseys rather than dates and memorization. I thought that was significant too. Narratives, just putting narratives together. And I like to tell a story of storytelling. I thought I was a good storyteller. I don't mind being the center of attention and doing this too. And a second book I read at that same time was called The Power of Storytelling. It was the title is called The Art of Influential Communication. Watch a comedian. Watch a great actor. Watch a great performance. Watch Mr. Holland's opus. When you get people who are artists, they're people that they're very creative. They think outside the box. They're originals. They don't imitate anything else. They do a lot of trial and error. They didn't learn how to perfect their art or their craft by reading about it. They went out there and they did it on their own, and I thought that made a lot of sense. And a big part of being creative and a big part of being an artist was the emotional component. Talk about that emotion aspect coming in there. And the word emotive means to move. And I remembered that enthusiasm was the #1 trait when it came to people, when it came to motivating people and students. And I just did that. It just came naturally to me. Telling stories. Andy Griffith, when he talked to his son about intangible things like love and faith, he could do that in the course of a story. The greatest teachers in our history, or at least Western civilization, are the philosophers. Socrates and Aristotle. And if you look at those books and read that like we had to do when we were in college, I look at the Socratic method. The best way to teach, if you're given that opportunity, is for the teacher, Socrates, and a young man or young woman, a young man on a log, one-on-one, having a dialogue. That's the best way to teach. We don't get that with a class of 240 people. And they said in that book, The Art of Influential Communication, it said that the second best way is probably telling a story. Andy Griffith, athletes, performances. Boy, the story of David and Goliath. When I start telling stories, even today, I was at Minneapolis for a hockey tournament not too long ago. Students come up, hadn't seen them in 30 years. They go, Frank, tell us that story about the elevator. Tell us that story about the airplane. Frank, tell us that story about when you got hogtied at the rodeo. We told a funny story, and it kicked off the lecture. And it wasn't just telling jokes. That story would segue into a concept, that abstract concept into a concrete story. Storytelling made a big difference. And when you talk about that passion, that aspect about being a passionate teacher. How do you expect students to get excited if you're not excited? When I went in there, it didn't take me very long to kick in. Once you're on stage, at 5-second reflex, boom, you're telling the story and doing this kind of stuff. When you are passionate in what you do, when you are demonstrating what you love, when you understand the art of communication, you do things that are subtle. Your body language, the nuance between sentences. And also, when you're telling a story, if you're a good storyteller, you get to control the cadence. You get to control the pace of that too. And in psychology, they call that flow. I used to ask my students this too. I go, did you have some flow today? And flow means that you get so wrapped up in a story, building up to the teachable moment in that story, that you forget all sense of time and what's going around there too. And you look up at the clock and it's already time to go. I don't know how many times we were still going and the clock was time to leave too. When you can do that kind of stuff, it makes a big difference. And here's the biggest lesson for me when it came to that type of artist and how you're going to present. It's totally new. It's spontaneous. It's uniquely me. I'm not imitating anybody. Students have tried to imitate my teaching style and it hasn't worked for them because they're not me, nor am I someone else here too. But when you have that passion component, when you are passionate, it shows students, number one, that you care, which is a big deal. Number two is that passion can be very contagious. And when I walked out, students were still talking about a lot of those topics when they went to their next class because their professors told me about that too. It's contagious. They got excited. Some people I work with say, God, when Frank leaves the room, we're typing faster, we're talking faster, we're doing everything faster. When you do that, it can be very contagious. And for me, it was very, very important because passion can be channeled. And remember, talk about the transformation that we made, and I made at UND here too, early in my teaching career, is I channel that passion, that energy. My goal, my purpose was to go into coaching. That didn't happen. But just because we didn't reach that goal doesn't mean it's going to be a bad ending to the story. I channel that passion, and being a coach or a teacher, I'm guessing a mentor or a parent is not all that different. You're trying to get a diverse group of people on the same page and trying to get a goal accomplished. And I was able to do that with that art of teaching, that type of communication, both verbal and nonverbal, and it's worked. And it's worked on a lot of different levels here too, and it worked for a long period of time. I was at a panel one time, and Dr. Myrna Olson, who taught her graduate students, PhD students who are going on Teach College, she always had me come in and speak to the kids on my topic, which was narrative lecturing. How do you accomplish that? How do you pull that off? And we share that too. And I remember when I was sharing my story, and I was young in my career, there was an older professor, and she was a Chester Fisk distinguished professor, and as she was getting up, she kind of walked over me and behind me, and she whispered, she goes, your style might work for you, but you're going to burn out a lot quicker than you think. And she walked out, and I thought, gee, I guess that's true too. But the funny thing about passion, when you channel it, when it's contagious, is that you get a lot of it back. Over my 40 years, I got so much back with the energy of students. There's days I walked down so played out, I could have stopped it all through and admitted myself for exertion. But you get a lot of energy back from the students in the laughter. You're on the same page, staying after class, getting letters. I've got over 1,000 emails and letters. When I just put this on last week, I was going to do my final lecture. Students that couldn't make it, and of course the students that showed up here too, remembering an episode, an event, something about the class. And I'm talking about students from Hatton, 44 years ago, Norway, 25 years ago, UND, 34-year span. When you do that, I got students here from Lake Region Community College. When you do that, you get a lot back too. And I didn't even come close to burning out. It kept me young. It kept me energized. I'm afraid now when I disengage, I might get old overnight and lose that enthusiasm or things like that as well too. That passion component's a big thing. And also, when you're an artist, you learn things by trial and error. I tried so many different things, and I wasn't afraid to put myself out there and fail. And if I failed, I got rid of that. And if it worked, I stuck with it, and I come up there too. And now instead of thinking about words like masochistic when I walk into the mass lectures, or massacre, I think of other words that start with the M, with the mass, and I think about being masterful. I think about a masterpiece. And I think about a title I gave to my colleagues many years ago, and I said, I feel like I'm a master instructor now too. And by master instructor, I kind of equate that to like friends I know who are master plumbers, who are master carpenters, master electricians. They were apprentices. They had role models. They were creative in the way they solved problems. They did the trial and error, and now they're at a place where they can fix anything because they've seen just about everything, and they've learned by that too. Master instructor always had a nicer ring to me than adjunct, professor, or even instructor, when you get that master part, because you've mastered something. And let me just wind this up here with two last bits of stretching and adjusting to get to where I am today, to make it to 40 years. Having all that done, said and done, that's no guarantee, but you've heard people say if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. I share with all my friends, I felt like teaching was absolutely effortless. It was so easy. I'd never gotten an adrenaline rush from lecturing from anything else except from high school sports. High school sports, especially wrestling, came so naturally to me. I didn't have to work at it at all. It's just easy. Teaching, after I learned how to do that, gave me that same kind of fulfillment, that same type of adrenaline rush. Once you put yourself into that situation, and you start to believe in that, and people believe in you too, you really see some great changes. And I think it totally transformed who I was and who I am today here too. The last two things that happened to me late in my career, I shouldn't say late, about the mid my career. Number one is that I always had a dream on my bucket list. I wanted to live or travel in Europe. And I didn't see how that's going to happen, certainly on a teacher's salary. But lo and behold, our department had an exchange program with the American College of Norway, where they exchanged professors, and my name came up a couple of times from former instructors from our department that had taught over there, and they recommended me, and people came over, they interviewed me, and they go, yeah, Frank, why don't you come over and do a semester with us? And I was kind of nervous about it, but I went there, and to this day, I just got a nice letter from my old boss from the American College of Norway in Moss, Norway. She gave me some nice compliments, and I told her that teaching in Norway was the highlight of my career. And here's why it was so important to me here too. Once you get this reputation, once you get this these classes that are full, once you get comfortable with your style, you can get pretty smug. You can think, I know everything, and you start to forget what it's like to be a student. And I think I had reached that point too. When I went to Norway, oh my God, that was, first of all, you have to go into another person's comfort zone, those students. And let me tell you, Norwegian students are very assertive. They don't like you, they don't think you're doing the job, they'll tell you. My boss told me, he goes, you know, Frank, I know you're used to some really nice evaluations at UND, but don't be hurt if they tell you something that isn't that great. And I was worried about that too. But when I got over there, if they didn't like what you were doing, they would do stuff in class, like they might just take a bowl of cereal and start eating in front of you. Just like to tell you that, you know, you're boring. One lady would bring in some knitting and just knit in front of me and let me know it. Another guy put his feet up right in front of me, like, you know, it was tough. But again, when you're pushed out of your comfort zone, and when you're pushed out of your comfort zone, I had to go somewhere and I had to learn the culture, the jokes, the story. I had to learn what it's like to be in their classroom. And one thing that was nice about being in Norway, they really pushed for you to travel. Not only had travel abroad to Norway, but they wanted you, they would give us time off from school. And if you took a group of students on a field trip, now let me tell you this, a field trip over there, Europe is the size of the United States. Students and I would get together during the week and we'd say, where do you want to go this weekend? Copenhagen, Amsterdam, you know, Poland, Germany, you know. It was, and what was nice about that is that if you took them, and I was glad to do all that too, if you were if you were the supervisor for the students, they would pay your way. You wouldn't have to pay for the airfare or the trip at all. You get it paid for by bringing those students. They valued that, and I did too. So I not only took the Americans, but the Norwegian students too, and we started off the first week, we went to Amsterdam. Went to the red light district. I'd never seen a live sex show before. Well, not paying for it like that, you know, professionally done. You know, the drugs, you know, and I always thought it was legal drugs over there. It's not legal drugs over there. It's more the softer drugs, recreational drugs, mushrooms, hashish, marijuana. And it's illegal, but the cops didn't look a different way if you're doing it in that district, you know. Anne Frank's home. You know, do stuff that you talk about and teach about. I thought it was pretty impressive. Next week we went to Copenhagen. Oh my God, the Norwegians call Copenhagen the most beautiful city in Europe, capital city, arguably, and it is too. You know, it's 14th century architecture. During World War II, they were neutral, so when Hitler came through, he didn't level it. They had McDonald's in the first floor of a 14th century castle. When we were walking through there, they were filming Lord Byron and we were extras in the courtyard. You can't get that kind of teaching, you know, with students and sharing that kind of stuff too. And in Copenhagen, we went to a place called Christiania. You know, Christiania, when you get to that place, that's where drugs, again, you can use them. It's kind of accepted, but it's a different part of town. We got to see that, and I brought back a lot of stories on how that's regulated and how it isn't all great and what happens over there and what part of town they're in too. I brought that back. You can't pay to that kind of education. One weekend we went to Auschwitz. We went to the concentration camps. Oh my God, on an emotional level, you'll never ever experience something like that too. We went there and we talked to the locals. We saw that, we took pictures, we bought videos, which they sell there too, to show what was done there too, and to keep that alive. They kept those concentration alive to educate the world, and we were getting that firsthand. After we got back to our motel rooms, many students just went to bed. They fell asleep. It's just emotionally taxing. And boy, we saw poverty. I thought I grew up in poverty. And what I learned real quickly is that we were poor, but we weren't that poverty-ridden. You know, we were provided for. We didn't have a lot extra, but we didn't go without. Oh my God, Poland at that time in 2000, absolutely, you couldn't spend $40 in that country. And I saw stuff like, you know, we ordered pizza and pizza with bananas on it. I've never even seen that before. Some of the greatest beer I've ever had in my life, you know. And people drinking beer for breakfast. It was so delicious, nutritious, you know. You could almost rationalize it. Did that, and our whole bill, we had a whole group of people, and I picked up the bill, was $32. I mean, it had been $200 in Grand Forks. Picked up the bill, and it was $32, and I threw a 40 out there, American money. And that lady who was working was so excited, she got $8 tips. She called up her friend, and she took the rest of the day off too. Poor. Went to Moscow. This is 2000, fall of the USSR too. We saw professors who were prostitutes. They told us, the government, don't get off that main road. This is, you know, there's a lot of, they call it Mafia, but the organized crime, you know, there's a lot of stuff going on. You can get a lot of trouble in a hurry. So we stayed in our motels, 5-star motels, probably staying for $5 a night too. And the stuff that we saw, and the most crushing thing, the stuff that I really remember the most, the stuff that made an impression emotionally on me too, kids who were starving. At the airport, you got a plane, little kids that were preschool asking for money. Be happy with a penny in American money. My buddy gave him a $5 bill, and they thought they had won the lottery. We go and eat at a restaurant, and the kids will be up in the window with their nose, Christmas time too. They have their nose up there too, trying to, I don't know, I want to say they're trying to look poor, but that's how they got the money from tourists. It was hard to see. Christmas Eve, we got to Copenhagen chocolate, Copenhagen cocoa, Copenhagen crystal. And got to see all that kind of stuff. You don't get to do that. And I'm thinking of the phrase too, when I got back, and it goes something like, it was a quotation by St. Augustine, and he said, "The world is a book, and those who choose not to travel read only one page." And, you know, I thought I knew so much, you know, 8 years of college, 20 years of teaching, then I didn't see very much. He said one page of the world. And when you get outside the United States, and you watch television over there too, it's not as biased as is over here too. Very critical of Americans, very critical of political leaders. And not that you have to agree or disagree, but you see, you know, there's a different side to this too, to what we're doing and what we see is different. We all learned quite a bit from that too. And then lastly, the last part I want to get to today too, we came back and I was again rejuvenated, redefined, and shared all that stuff. It was new and exciting. One last little jerk and one last little growth spurt for me too. I got back and a new word was buzzing around campus too, and the word is assessment. Now we were all doing assessment before, with testing and stuff like that too, but a new form of assessment was coming out, and they were being pushed by the administration, both summative and formative assessment, which means at the end of the semester and also daily. But if you have large classes, it's kind of hard to quiz and come up with good teaching strategies, see if the people are learning more than rote memorization, if they're learning critical thinking, if they're learning creative skills, if they're thinking outside the box. You know, that's a difficult thing to do with big classes. But I was awarded a Bush Teaching Scholar, you know, back in the day when they used to identify teachers that were doing stuff that was unique, and I was doing it unique with my style and my teaching, and I thought we could assess critical thinking at the higher level. And we did that. and I was named a Bush Teaching Scholar and did a couple things for me. Number one is that we got feedback, and we got feedback from the students. Now, that doesn't sound very much, but when I think about this, I go, you know, for my whole teaching career, we got very little feedback from students, you know? We had the SGID, we had the Selfie Starfish now that came out, but end of the semester evaluations, but their end of the semester, too late to change anything as the semester unfolding. We took very little emphasis from students. What I learned from getting student feedback was eye-opening. I said, you know, I've been teaching with a three-legged stool. There's a fourth leg to that stool, and that's getting student feedback. That makes a big difference. Boy, students shared things. They told me how other kids were cheating in those math lectures. Fix that, you know, easy to do that too. They talked about questions. That was a kind of a neat aspect about how you construct questions. I started to recruit undergraduate teaching assistants to work with me and liaisons. And students will tell other students and getting students, undergraduates, to do lectures for me. And I could watch them and see that creativity and, more importantly, that passion that sometimes you lose. I got rejuvenated by that again too. And the second thing that assessment did for me, the student input was invaluable. Kept me fresh for another 20 years. The second thing it did though, it introduced me to like-minded faculty. A lot of people I was teaching with, a lot of traditional sociologists, they did not understand what I was doing. They didn't get, you know, Frank, sociology is not social psychology. You know, this is social problems at a societal level. This is not motivation and coaching. And you can do both, but nobody really got that. But when I got introduced to other like-minded faculty, Dexter Perkins over in petroleum. You wouldn't think petroleum sociology. We had a lot in common when it came to critical thinking. We're both problem solvers. I was doing problem solving when it comes to dysfunctional families. He was doing that when it came to air pollution, air clarification, and conversion of coal industries. We went across campus. I hooked up with, that's a bad way of putting that. I met and had a professional liaison with Susan Nelson. And we developed a class called Sociology of Sport. You know, two different fields, business and sport. You know, we did sociology of medicine, sociology of music. What happened is that you started to see and you started to get reinforcement from people across campus because we don't always talk to people across campus. Sociology, you know, you get into these different areas. Thomasine Heitkamp, Chester Fritz, distinguished professor, we're in the same building, social work and sociology, and they never even talked to each other. We did panels together, you know, we worked together, we did stuff that I picked up so much more. I thought social work was just applied sociology. There's much more than that too. When that happened, it made a big difference, and I'll finish with this idea. When it came to being a master instructor, I've always felt this. When I think about baseball, because of my sporting background and sporting analogies, I think about a five-tool baseball player, you know, a complete ball player, a superstar. That's someone that can hit for average, they can hit for power. They got great speed, they got a great arm, and their defensive skills. Five-tool players. I like to think now as a master instructor, as a superstar, and I can say it now too because I'm at the end of my career. Nobody's going to pay me or dispute and say you're not worth anything anymore too. But I feel like I'm a five-tool player. You know, that 5 legs on that stool. You know, narrative lecturing. You know, talking about storytelling, talking about assessment or academic feedback, and being an expert in that area. When you talk about those kind of things, when you start to see that, that wasn't what I had in mind when I went in education. I wanted to be a coach. As I get to reflect and share with you today here too, what's really nice about this too is that sometimes not getting your goal or reaching your destination, that doesn't necessarily be a bad thing. If I'd have went into coaching and I went and taught in high school, primarily, I probably, as a coaching as my master's status, I would have probably coached just young men. Now they got young women's wrestling now, but they just started that. I'd have been coaching young men, and I'd have been a smaller group of people. Today, I get to teach large groups, both men and women, get to teach abroad. As the person who introduced me said, I get to teach at Grand Forks Air Force Base. I just came from a speaking presentation. I get to touch the future. I get to speak at various high schools and middle schools. I was speaking to 4th graders a week ago, and that was a little bit trippy, a little bit different. I enjoyed it. I don't know how effective I was, but I came back now too, and I was thinking, God, you know, I'm an old guy. I'm a baby boomer, born 1946, 1964. And then I taught the Generation X that followed us, then Generation Y, then Generation Z, which I thought was pretty young. That was 3 generations removed from me. I was getting students say, you taught my grandmother? I go, no, I didn't teach your grandmother. They tell me the name, I go, yes, I taught your grandma. Those 4th graders are alpha generation. That's 5 generations. It's time for me to move on and give somebody else a chance to do what I did. And the only advice I'd give the young professors and anybody who would listen to my story or read my book when I finally publish it is that you got to be an original. You can't try to teach like someone else taught because you're a different personality. When you get into this idea, it makes a big difference, and you don't need tenure. You don't need lifetime contracts. You know, if you do your job 1 year at a time, it'll take care of itself, and I'll tell you what, 40 years will fly by quickly if you enjoy what you're doing. One of my stories I share with people, you know, the most common time for a heart attack, statistically speaking, in America, is Monday morning between 6:30 and 8:30. Now, educational psychologists got together and they've studied this, and they go, you know, Monday mornings are tough day anyway too, but why Monday? Why not Wednesday or Thursday or whatever? But they believe that it's people getting up for a job that they're not emotionally involved with. They don't see the purpose in it. And he said, sometimes people, we exchange security for passion. And what they mean by that is that some of us, I hear with my students, I'd love to be a teacher, but there's no money in it. I'm gonna go on something else and make more money. I almost did that with business. I almost did that going into the bank. You know, when it comes to money, that's kind of relative. And whether you're a mechanic or a teacher or whatever profession or trade you pick up, if you're the best at what you do, you're gonna get paid. You're gonna get paid your worth. You know, there's, when I left one institution because I wasn't paid what I thought I should get paid, one of my bosses said, you know, Frank, sociology professor a dime a dozen, you know, what makes you think you should get paid more than anybody else? And I go, well, they may be a dime a dozen, I said, but so are people who drive a car, but not everybody drives a car well. I drive a car very well, and I think I should be paid more. Know your self-worth, you know, don't compromise on that, and don't compromise security for passion. Find out what your purpose is, what you're good at, what you're unique at, what you can be spontaneous about, and don't be afraid to laugh at yourself. People ask me to speak today too, so if you get done quickly, Frank, which I have trouble getting done quickly with anything, leave time for some questions. So if you have any questions, I'll be glad to handle them with you. Great. Yes?
So you mentioned Krista, your boss.
Krista was my boss at American College of Norway.
She still has her Frank White bobblehead out here.
I can't tell you how many students have sent me a copy of the bobblehead, and that bobblehead has been all over the world. I've got students that sent me they were in Afghanistan, students in Japan, students in Alaska, mountains in Europe. They've sent me that picture. I think that's kind of neat. Did Steve, the secretary, have my bobblehead as well? And a bunch of Norwegian students had that as well too. So I think it's kind of neat. And if I could say one thing about Krista too, great boss. And when I left there, she wrote me a glowing recommendation. And she said, you know, the students here, she said two things. She said, Frank, did you notice on your Facebook how many Norwegian students wished you well and they remembered you and they invite you back for the all-class reunion next summer, 2023? I go, yes, I did. I wouldn't have forgot that. And the second thing she said, Frank was unique from a lot of the other professors that came and spoke American Otherwise. She goes, the students learned from Frank, but the students followed Frank, she said. They followed him around. They were consumed by him. And I will mention this. Remember when I said they probably won't give you good recommendations because they just don't do that like they do over here, which I've been very lucky to have. But a couple of students wrote in there too, Frank White is God. And they wrote a big picture of the earth. He's the best teacher on earth. This is the reason I go, wow. My point is, not to impress you with that, but my point is that when you get that style and you're an original and you're competent and you're fundamentally sound with the theory, you'll get that. It's not unique. And she's seen a lot of people come over there and not all have the most success. But I'm going back in 2023. Are you going to go there? You got family there now? I know. Yeah. Isn't there a city in Norway named your family's name? Oninston?
No, not Oninston, but not Skid.
Yes, a lot of the Norwegians that came here, I learned too, is they took the name of the community. Bjørnstad is the town in Norway. Olsen Island. I thought maybe yours would be one when you came over because you're pretty firmly ingrained in Norwegian culture. We were talking before I spoke today too. I thought my last lecture, it was Jean's last lecture. Your last day at Grand Forks Red River, you asked me to come and speak to your seniors, and it was 4 years ago. I thought it was 5. It was 4 years ago, and we sent him off. Now he's here to send me off. So I thought that was kind of neat too. I see some familiar faces out there too, and I think those Duncan girls, I think you guys owe me a paper yet. I think you skipped out without, I don't think you did everything you're supposed to do before you left. Yes, Courtney. What do I miss most? There's absolutely no question is the relationships with the students. It happened early when I was in the student teaching, and it's the one thing that I was so afraid to be able to show up here today too. But when you establish relationships, they're much better than the awards. They're much better than the salary. That frightens me. But here's my plan, and I think it's going to work too. Now I have more time off, and although I'm not wealthy, I'm very comfortable now because I've been given a good career with good pay, is that I can go to all the UND sports now, home and away. I can go all the destination cities when it comes to hockey, and that's where I see you. I've met your family. You brought up Dickie Went's name, from my high school bully and stuff like that too. But I think I can do all that too, and instead of losing all relationships, I think I'll be able to establish that when I go speak to those fourth graders, the principal, the superintendent, and several of the school teachers were students of mine too. So I got to see that too. So I used to see them come to college later. Now I go there and they're doing the teaching. That's going to be the nice thing to do. When you raise your hand, Courtney, it made me think of one other thing too. When I was watching the motivational speakers and listening to every tape, Tony Robbins, Awaken the Giant, went in, Awaken the Giant within, and I awoke my giant and I took off. But another one was Dale Carnegie. And Dale Carnegie, and I'm sure you do this in your business too, Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. When you meet somebody, when you shake their hand, you put them in a context. So you remember people. And students see me from 30 years and they're shocked that I remember them. And I remember meeting you and I go, Courtney Barstead, Williston, North Dakota, Coyotes on ice because we went and watched the Coyotes play hockey at the Ralph, and communication major. What was communication major, and you dated a hockey player. Yes. When you put people into a context, you remember that too. I was at Tampa for the national championships in hockey five years ago already. It was 2016. And a group of students came up to me, and I figured they were former students, the way you're looking at me and smiling. And one of them goes, Frank, tell my buddies what my name is and when I was at UND. And I never seen him in, well, this 2016, so I hadn't seen him in 20 years. I go, I didn't know his first name. I go, your last name is Henderson. You're from Henderson, Nevada, and you're an air traffic control major. And they just high-five each other and go, it's unbelievable. And I've been told that I taught 40,000 students in my career, 40,000. I don't remember all of them, but I remember Gabe, Jamestown, wrestling. I mean, I do that with everybody. Sarah from Devil's Lake, she was grade school when I was teaching at the college, came to UND later on, became a student. I don't know if you were a student of mine, but I know I had Sarah, I had your brother Pat, yep, and I taught with your mother, and Larry came and did lectures for us many times, watched her grow up, and you were just, you were a finalist for the North Dakota Teacher of the Year. I wrote a letter, said you should have won that. Did you remember that? And I had another favorite student of mine too who didn't appreciate that because she was up for the same award, Diane Bjornsson from up in that Park River area. And then you were just named the principal at, is it Sweetwater? Prairie View, and that's one of the elementary schools. I never forgot that kind of stuff either too. But if you can do that, that works. And when you see a student and they go, God, he had 500 students and you remember my major, that's Dale Carnegie. I also learned later on too, that's the same technique that Charles Manson used when he tried to get people to do stuff. He did the Stephen Covey and the Dale Carnegie stuff. I go, God, I don't know if I should share that story with anybody, but I thought that was kind of funny. But he did that too. It's impressive, the influence, not the manipulation, but the influence you can have on people. If you take a moment to care, and you can only show that in your behavior. And I'll tell you another thing about passion. Remember I said it's contagious? Shows how much you care, and you can channel it. Here's the thing about passion. You cannot fake that. Young kids, teachers, the first day in class, they can tell if you're just trying to, snow them. It's got to come from within. It's got to, Oprah Winfrey talked about how it's got to be natural. It's got to come out easily. With me, it was never a problem coming out. It was probably common trying to keep it in once in a while too. But no, it's got to be genuine. And when you find that, everybody has something inside them that they're really good at. Sometimes we don't find that. Sometimes we don't choose that. But if you're lucky enough to identify that, it'll make a big difference, and it made all the difference in the world in our in my life and my times here too. And of course, we couldn't get into a lot of stories. Again, I'd like to remind it wasn't all recognition and awards. It was a lot of growing pains, and when you're growing up, people, I've been interviewed many times, and people say, "Did you know you want to be a professor when you're younger?" I go, no. I don't know anybody want to be a professor when they were younger. No one when they're younger says, "I want to be a college professor." I wanted to be a fireman and a cowboy and a professional athlete, you know. I wanted to be a coach. I think to be a college professor, and I'm only speaking for myself here too, but I think you have to have some detours. I think you have to have some disappointments. I think there's got to be a circuitous route here. There's very few, I think, that shoot right to the top and stay here. I think you've got to find yourself. You got to find the right area, and mine was serendipitous. I'm just surprised I found it so quickly and got to stay for so long. Didn't do something to sabotage that. Any other questions? Fourth graders, you know, one thing I like about them too is that you ask them, they got questions? They got 1,000 questions, but here's a question they ask you. What's your favorite color? do you like horses? One of my favorites, they ask me, I speak on vaping a lot too. Did you vape growing up? I go, I'm so old. They barely had cigarettes when I was growing up. There was no vaping when I was there too. But they're really fun because they're so honest and open and spontaneous. That's a good group to be around. I think by being around young college students my entire life, young students for the most part, they're healthy, their star is rising, their best years are ahead of them. And I think that rubs off on you too. I like to think that it's kept me young, and I'm a little bit worried about retirement where I might just get old overnight too and lose that. But I hope with the sports and the speaking and visiting high schools and doing that stuff now too. Courtney, I forgot, I was going to add one more thing to that list too. I think with my retirement, I'm going to go into coaching now. I missed it. I missed the whole boat. Now I think I go to high school and I go, hey, I'd like to be a coach, football or wrestling. You won't have to pay me a thing. I can talk to kids about academic advising, going to University of North Dakota, Mayville, Lake Region, whatever their goals are. I think I can do that for you. And I think I can probably get into it that way, and I'll be the right price now too. And you can be the judge here too, but you know what I think? I think if I went into teaching right off the bat and got into coaching, I think I'd have been a horrible coach. And the reason I say that is because sports to me, especially wrestling, came so naturally to me. I think I'd have been impatient. I go, how can you not get this? This is the simplest thing in the world. When I went into teaching wasn't easy for me. Being a good student was difficult. I had to work hard, and I appreciate students who have to work hard because I was one of them. I became a good student, which means that you can become a good student. Athletes, you know, you can work hard, you can get to a certain level, but it's not for everybody. Not everybody's going to be a champion. I think I would have been very, very impatient. But now, with my sage advice, I think maybe now I can probably maybe do that. You and I helped out with Larimore that time. I think that was kind of fun. I go, student asked me too, I got one, Frank, you got any regrets? I do have one regret. Remind me of that Larimore story, Gene. I was at Haddon High School, got a good relationship with the students at the end. At the end of my 12-week teaching schedule, two of the wrestlers, they were seniors and they were popular kids and they were great wrestlers. They come up in my office, I was cleaning out, and they go, Frank, would you stick around and coach us? And I go, I don't know, your coach probably wouldn't appreciate that. His coach was their coach at the time was an ex-basketball player, and he was on board. He came in to, he goes, hey Frank, we'll pay you gas, maybe we'll pay the gas, you know, we could really use your expertise, and these guys are really good. We could win the state championship with them. And I thought about it for a while, and I go, you know, I'm going to be interviewing for jobs. This is my last quarter at school. I passed it up. Those two young men went on to the state finals that year, and they got beat, but they were in the state finals. We're still friends today. We still talk about that too. And that is my one regret, because on my bucket list, every time I've been to the state restaurant now 50 years in a row. I've been here since 1972. I never missed one. Every year at state finals, I go, God, it'd be so fun to go down there and be a coach and help a kid. I think it'd be more fun to help a kid win the state championship than win one on your own here too. Probably never gonna get that chance to. And I had 2 shots at that too, early in my career. But like most people do, you think, oh, there'll be 1,000 other offers. 0. But maybe now if I can get into the schools around here, maybe I get one more shot at it. But that's definitely on the bucket list.
Explain what the butterfly nest and the calf roping was related to in Sophia.
Do you guys have a time for a quick, one of my wonderful stories? Do you remember that? Oh yeah, I did it at your guest lecture one time. Oh. You know, when you're talking about social, it's boring stuff, so I tried to dress up with a story. And one of the stories I dressed it up with was, I call it the rodeo. And see if I can remember it now too, but we're talking about dating, take care, dating in the Jane, I bet you remember this story too, the butterfly rodeo story. We're talking about dating and the millennial and online sites or dating, stuff like that too, and how it changed so much. And I was talking about the different stages of love, you know, like I knew anything about that, you know, passion and infatuation, all that stuff too. And I go, you know, guys more than women have a fear of commitment. You know, when you see a young lady, like I used to talk about this too, I was over at one of the sorority houses for dinner one night, and one of the girls got engaged, and oh my God, they were coming out of the top stairs with cakes, and they were screaming and hollering, and they were crying. I thought somebody had died, and I go, what happened? It was AFE house, and I said, what happened? And they said, oh, Jane got engaged, and they were all clapping and hugging, and it was the greatest thing in the world. I said, when guys get engaged, it's a whole different story. Here's a guy who just got engaged. They go, Frank, what's wrong with you? I go, got engaged. What? I said, I got engaged. And they go, oh God, sorry, you know, get some sleep. Maybe that can help you. He said, and I said, and I'll give you one last example of how guys look at it differently than women, because there's a distinct socialization to that. That's the story. We look at things differently. And guys have a little more fear of commitment. Women see it as something jubilant and two identities meshing together and becoming one. And I know I'm going to wake up with the rest of my life. Guys look at it and go, oh God, you're sitting on the other side of the table. You're here for a long time, aren't you? You're not leaving anywhere. Here's the rodeo example. I said, when it comes to women, they're all excited and they're doing this stuff like here. Here's a guy that just got engaged to be married. It's a rodeo example. So he's in gate number 3. The guy is the calf. The gate number 3, the wife or the girl is on the horse, and she's got the lasso and she's ready. And she said, open gate number 3. That gate opens up and that poor man takes off running, but there's nowhere to run. You know, there's walls to do. And within 3 seconds, she hits him and hooks him and wraps him up, and he's sitting here like this. I said, this is a guy's perspective of getting married. And Matt Green, the hockey player, he came back one summer and we were doing my golf tournament and exchanging bobbleheads and stuff like that too. He said, Frank, that story you told about that being hog-tied, he said, we laughed so hard. He said, I told everybody to take that class. And he was interviewed for the Los Angeles Times when he won the Stanley Cup. He was a champion in the Stanley Cup. And they asked him, was there anybody in your life that made a difference in your life, that had a big impression and changed your way of looking at yourself? He goes, oh, Frank White, got a shout out from the Los Angeles Times. And the butterfly example was that guys who are, when we're young and single, we're like butterflies, you know, we're running in the tall grass, you know, and the girl's trying to catch you, you know, and too, and they can't catch you, and there's no walls you can run around, and you jump up. There's so many butterflies, there's so many to catch until you get that thing over top of you. That was the socialization, the butterfly and the rodeo, and there's hundreds of those. And that's the psychology of humor. People get it because I always say this in my stories of psychology. If it wasn't funny, there wouldn't be much truth to it. There's a lot of truth to that too. Stereotypes, fear of commitment. We got to break them down. Frank means free man. I'm going to free you from your stereotypes. One of my former students said, took her boyfriend to class, you got to come listen to Frank. He came to class that one day when we were doing that butterfly. She never brought him back again. But yeah, we've had parents bring students. I remember over the years I'd lecture and I'd see people in my classes like professors. Ted Pedaleski, if you know these names here. Ted Pedaleski sit in my class. Lloyd Omdahl, Marty Gottschalk over in criminal justice. Terry Huppen, my class one time, holy cow, Terry Huppen. Terry Huppen was teaching at George Washington University out in West Coast, and he was putting together a chapter called Narrative Lecturing, and he used Frank White as an example. When you see that kind of stuff, it changes you. You start to think of yourself differently. I've seen you in my classes. Dr. Myrna Olson came in classes many times. She sent PhD students. When I was out there, I saw federal judges in class. You go, wow, you're not a student, are you? No, my son said to come and listen to you. And Marty Gottschalk used to send his students to my class. He's a criminal justice professor. He's moved up, one of the good young professors. He used to send people to my class and he'd say, just take class with Frank. You don't have to worry about sociology. Just watch how he communicates with his body language, his nonverbals. Just watch that aspect. I don't care if you're going into business or you're going into medical field. Watch how he communicates. That's very, very effective. And he'd send there, that's his advice. Go take class with him just to watch the communication. I thought that was pretty impressive. Yep.
So Frank, I'm one of those. I was a communications major, but I still tell people that I'm a communications major at UNE, and I almost minored in sociology, but I minored in Frank.
You do. There's a few people that have a minor in Frank White.
You give me my senior year, and you're, John, you're close.
I said, John, take one credit, you'll have a minor in Frank White. Those Duncan girls have minors in Frank White. Courtney's got a minor in Frank White. I think it's 20 hours you've taken of Frank that it means something too. People put that on their resume too. People have brought that up in an interview too. A guy had a Frank White minor and they didn't know what that meant, but then they explained it too. And I'll tell you this too, John, you're in communications professor. Communication are a bunch of closet sociologists. I've guest spoke over there many times. They talk about diversity, social class, and media bias, the mass media, the social media. They're a bunch of closet social psychologists. They just won't admit it, because we got kind of a bad reputation. I've got a bad reputation. We've got a very good reputation in sociology. But we're changing that. But I forgot about the Frank White minor. Yeah. You got a Frank White bobblehead. Oh. Lacey, you got a Frank White bobblehead that we put on the internet. Your son got a hold of it and pulled the head off it and tore it apart and kicked it. Yeah, I said, that kid's going to be a good wrestler. Is he not a little guy wrestling? There's no question. If he can pull a head, Frank White's bobblehead off at that age, he's going to be state wrestling champion. Darren, got a question? Darren Day. You got a Frank White minor. Yeah. Yeah, Dakota didn't get one. She got here a little bit late. She got here to COVID and she took a class and you got into it and you were going to be my teaching assistant and I didn't see for 2 more years with the coronavirus. God, that's sad. That's a sad story. You'll be telling your grandchildren. Your granddaughter climb up in your lap, she'll say, tell me the story about Frank White. And you go, coronavirus, I never got a chance. I never got a minor, never got a bobblehead, never got a story. Pretty easy audience. You're easier than the 4th graders. No favorite colors? How many former students raise your hand in here? I pretty much recognize all of them. Your name is? Tracy? Oh, God, could I miss that? Didn't quite recognize. 3 generations of cooks. I graduated with your mother. You were in my class, and I had you, 3 years ago? Three generations. Man.
When I was in college, I had little children, and it was a struggle, but I had to be there, and getting to class sometimes was a challenge. And I remember one day you said, how many people went to the whatever it was concert the day before? And how did anybody get tickets to that and not go? And nobody, of course, nobody said yes to that. And you said, how much were those tickets? And then you went up to the blackboard and you wrote down how much this class cost, and how many days of class, and how much your seat costs every day. And, you know, being on the budget I was, I thought, holy shit, I am not missing this.
That was a teachable moment too. I was telling the students that we're the only profession where the students pay up front. You pay your tuition before the semester starts, and it doesn't matter if you show up or not. I get paid the same thing. So if you skip a class, do the math. I said, would you pay for tuition? It's about back then about $25 a day, twice a week. That's $50. If you bought tickets, $25 got you a nice contract. You'd have never skipped those tickets out, but you skipped Frank White. But after that, you never did that again.
It was one of your defining moments.
Well, that would be a teachable moment. It might have it defined you. it defined you. I went to school with your dad, college with your mother, and had you two in class. We're like family. Yeah, I appreciate that. You were supposed to be here for my teaching award one a couple years ago. Storm, bad weather. Oh, you went to a concert. You decided. We had Eric Church was singing at the Laris. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. That's a weird deal. Mixed feelings to be your last one. Yeah, and being like I said, just think of the first ones there too.